Video one to understanding this complex situation that I'm in. This one is about my Aunt Brenda. It all kind of began with her. In hindsight, she has orchestrated chaos in my family. From my perspective, an extreme narcissist that was just constantly causing problems in the family that we couldn't see until it got to a certain point of life. I started taking care of my. I had been the only one really to ever take care of my grandparents physically when they had physical needs and whatnot. And when my grandfather got cancer, as he needed care, I started providing it. And then my aunt came in. She had somehow had my dad taken off as a power of attorney. And my grandparents thought that he was. There was only the two children, my dad, my aunt, and my grandparents thought both of them were on, the executor and had rights as power of attorney. But when my grandfather got sick, my grandmother was disabled. We learned otherwise, but there was nothing we could do really. So she orchestrated all of his home care, which never ended up coming. I did that 100% myself until I couldn't do it anymore, and then I called my mom in for some help in the end days. Um, so there was a lot of shit that went on through that. She was giving him medication that she shouldn't have. She halted a natural food regimen that we had him on that was he was making leaps and bounds with improvements, and we had to stop that until we could get natural foods approved by his doctor. And by the time we were allowed to resume, it was literally too late. So he was moved to hospice under very malevolent conditions and was never fed food or water again after moving there. So he died shortly after being in hospice and a few days. And I've asked for a police investigation into the whole thing, why he was being given hydromorphone by my aunt when he didn't want it or need it. And, he was reacting to things. He was, from my perspective, being slowly killed off. I sent out all kinds of complaints to the family health network that was supposed to coordinate all of his care, to the director of that unit that was, or the manager or whatever, Heather Campbell. She was directly oppressing me. I've complained about that. I've complained about the nurses that were coming into my grandparents' home, how they seemed to treat me like garbage and climb right up my aunt's ass. The oppression was just so horrible in the middle of taking care of my grandfather and all that kind of stress. And I could tell that people had an agenda and were working around me. So my grandfather is dead. And then shortly after, my grandmother was moved out of her house. And all of her the house itself has been sold. It was supposed to be my dad's inheritance, but with my aunt and her colluding with my grandmother's lawyer, that didn't happen. It got sold to a third party that was affiliated with my aunt through her Baptist church in Bloomfield, Ontario, Emmanuel Baptist. And so the new neighbor oppresses me, since that was my grandmother's house with shared driveway and water and whatnot. He's shut off my water. He's blocked my driveway. The oppression just continues with him, and recently his own children have been charged with fraud and whatnot. They're characters I don't really need or appreciate in my community, but here they are. So then I complained to the OPP. Nothing happened there. I went to OPRID, the Office of the Independent, whatever. They're all useless, but I'm following everything right through to the end. An investigation was supposed to ensue about elder abuse of my grandmother, but that investigator, well, for whatever reason, she set it all up, but the investigation has never happened, to my knowledge. So all that's still up in the air. My aunt just having all these controls. She's alienated me and my dad's part of the family away from my grandmother. My grandmother is confused, and she loves us, but we feel at risk going to visit her because there's always false allegations made about us or something, and I personally have been through too much to be set up for false charges right now, which I was being set up for false charges just through my aunt. When my son and I would communicate with my grandmother, they would call the police on us, and I actually have a video that I'll be putting on YouTube of my aunt's husband, Ed Sokolowski, calling the police on my mom and I, abusing 911 services, making false allegations. So when police attended, I showed them the video that my mom and I were merely trying to ask questions about my grandmother and the estate and what was going on. And he was just so offensive and wouldn't speak to us. He just picked up the phone and called 911 and made the false allegations. And when the police came and saw the video, they refused to charge him. So I called them out on being Masons, and the one officer proudly admitted that he was not. And the other one, he played some games, verbal games about him being a Mason. So at the end of the day, my uncle was not charged. But interestingly enough, my uncle's brother, Eric Sokolowski, was caught online by a group called Kids. It's Kawartha something. It's a vigilante group that catches pedophiles. And Eric Sokolowski, well, the video shows that he drove 2 hours to go to Peterborough, Ontario to meet a 13-year-old girl for sex. And when asked if he would stop if it hurt, he said no. She has to lose her virginity at some point. And the group actually said that he was the worst they had dealt with so far. So this is what's going on inside my aunt's family, that once the sex abuse in foster care, in foster homes, which she was a part of, was being exposed, and then her brother-in-law was exposed, like, we're starting to see why I was pushed out of her family and why she teamed up with CAS, and all this oppression has ensued. So that's the story about my lovely aunt. Her and I were like sisters most of my life. She's my name, like I was named after her. But in hindsight, I can see that she was a handler, a gatekeeper. There was things going on in my community that she controlled me in certain ways, and heavily, and it was through religion. She ritually abused me. Every time I wanted to be an individual or think for myself or stand up for myself, scripture was thrown at me, or something to do with the church, and she guilted me and controlled me through that until I found ways to liberate myself. But that wouldn't come until I would meet and deal with Lynn Donovan, the Reverend of the Presbyterian Church. So I guess I'll stop it here, and the next video will be about Lynn Donovan.